The Cathar Grand Convoy, a shimmering flotilla of 1,000 graceful, teardrop-shaped vessels, was a testament to meticulous planning. It was the arc of an entire species, fleeing the slow, inevitable death of their home star. Every calculation had been triple-checked, every contingency modeled, every conceivable risk mitigated. And then came the whispers, the fragmented data packets purchased from a jittery Glim trader, about a species called humans. The data was, to put it mildly, insane. It spoke of a sentient species that had evolved on a Class 7 death world, a planet actively, malevolently trying to kill everything on it. A world with tectonic fury, atmospheric rage, rampant plagues, and a biosphere built on the foundational principle of eat or be eaten. The Cathar, a species of tall, slender beings with gazelle-like grace and nerves to match, found the concept fundamentally obscene. Their own homeworld had been a planetary garden, a place of such profound stability that the concept of a natural disaster was purely theoretical, like a squared circle. Fleet Captain Valerius, whose 4 elegant ears twitched with every minor fluctuation in the ship's inertial dampeners, reviewed the data for the 10th time. "They harness uncontrolled plasma reactions for warmth and sustenance," he murmured, his voice a soft, melodic chime of disbelief. His first officer, Xylo, shuddered, his fine, silver fur bristling. "They call it fire, Captain. The reports suggest they gather around it and sing songs, willingly. And their primary mode of conflict resolution throughout their history appears to have been hitting each other with increasingly sophisticated rocks," Valerius continued, scrolling through a montage of what looked like planetary-scale self-immolation. "They have institutionalized recreational activities that simulate mortal peril. They consume poisons like ethanol and capsaicin for pleasure. They keep predators as household pets. The rumor, however," Xylo prompted gently, "the reason we are even entertaining this madness," Valerius sighed, the sound like wind through hollow reeds. "Yes, the rumor, that no matter the cataclysm, no matter the odds, some of them always survive, that their entire biology and psychology are pathologically geared towards enduring the unsurvivable." The Cathar convoy was traveling through a poorly charted region of the galaxy. Their models predicted a 97.3% chance of a safe journey, a figure that left the entire species on the verge of a collective anxiety attack. An extra point of survivability was worth any price. Or so they thought. The decision was made. They would divert course to a small human outpost on a desolate moon called Triton's Folly and offer passage to a handful of these Death-Worlders. Not as equals, of course. More as biological emergency systems. Walking, talking, terrifyingly adaptable life rafts. The human delegation consisted of just 3 individuals, a number deemed manageable. Sergeant Eva Rostova, a woman whose calm, steady gaze seemed to absorb all light and give nothing back. Dr. Aris Thorne, a scientist whose cheerful curiosity about the Cathar's delicate anatomy was deeply unsettling. And a grease-stained engineer everyone called Jinx, a name the Cathar linguistic software translated as harbinger of misfortune, which did nothing to soothe their nerves. Xylo was assigned as their official liaison. It was, he privately believed, a punishment for questioning the captain's logic. His first meeting with them set the tone for the entire relationship. "Welcome aboard the Starlight's Tier," Xylo said, executing a perfect 4-limbed bow of greeting. "We trust your accommodations will be adequate." Eva Rostova looked around the sterile, white chamber they had been given. It was comfortable, but it had the distinct feel of a very polite quarantine cell. "It's fine," she said, her voice a low rumble compared to the Cathar's chimes. "A bit clean. Where's the coffee machine?" Xylo's ears drooped in confusion. Coffee, a stimulant beverage derived from roasting the seed of a plant toxic to most known life forms. "That's the one," Jinx chimed in, grinning. "Can't face a potential galactic catastrophe without it." Xylo made a mental note. The humans required a constant supply of a stimulating neurotoxin to function. This was getting worse with every passing second. The first 2 weeks were a study in mutual bewilderment. The humans found the Cathar's constant, low-level panic exhausting. The Cathar found the humans' placid acceptance of cosmic uncertainty to be the single most terrifying thing they had ever encountered. They watched hollows of historical Earth events with the same morbid fascination one might watch a star collapse. World wars, asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, and through it all, the little bipedal creatures just kept rebuilding, readjusting, and making sarcastic jokes about the end of the world. Then the 97.3% probability failed. A cascade of alarms, softer and more melodic than human ones, but no less urgent, echoed through the ship. A previously undetected gravimetric shear, a 1 in a billion cosmic pothole, had grabbed the Starlight's tier, and a dozen other ships in the convoy's vanguard. Xylo felt the deck lurch as the ship was flung sideways through dimensions that were not meant to be traversed. Lights flickered. The serene hum of the engine screamed into a discordant shriek. Xylo was thrown against a bulkhead, his slender limbs tangling. Panic, cold, and absolute seized him. His training, his protocols, all of it evaporated into a singular, overwhelming thought. We are all going to die. Around him, the Cathar crew were either frozen in terror or flailing uselessly. The emergency lights bathed the corridor in a blood-red glow. Through the chaos, three figures moved with an eerie sense of purpose. It was the humans. Jinx was already wrenching open a service panel, his face a mask of concentration. Eris was looking at a flickering monitor with an expression of intense academic interest. "Fascinating," he muttered. "The sheer tidal forces should be atomizing our cellular structure." Eva Rostova planted her feet, braced herself against the shuddering walls, and looked at the terrified Cathar liaison. "Xylo, right, what's the situation?" "The situation?" Xylo shrieked, his voice climbing several octaves. "The situation is that we are plunging to our doom in a metallic coffin." Eva nodded slowly, as if he'd just given her a weather report. "Right, any idea what kind of doom we're plunging towards? Specifics are helpful." Before Xylo could articulate another wail of despair, the ship gave a final, bone-jarring shudder and then silence. A heavy, profound silence, broken only by the groaning of stressed metal and the soft, terrified whimpers of the Cathar. They had crashed. The viewscreen, miraculously intact, showed a landscape of impossible, unending white. Jagged peaks of ice clawed at a bruised purple sky, and a relentless wind drove glittering shards of snow against the viewport. A temperature gauge blinked a number so low it seemed a typographical error. "Well," Jinx said, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit, "that's not ideal." The cold seeped in first. The Starlight's tier was a marvel of Cathar engineering, but its hull was designed for the vacuum of space, not for conducting heat away on a world where the atmosphere itself was a super-chilled fluid. Within minutes, the internal temperature began to plummet. For the Cathar, it was a death sentence. Their biology, evolved for a world of gentle, unchanging warmth, had no defense. A collective lethargy fell over them. Their movements became slow, their thoughts sluggish. Xylo felt his own limbs growing heavy, his will to panic draining away, replaced by a fuzzy, fatalistic calm. It was then that Sergeant Rostova took command. "All right, listen up." Her voice cut through the despair like a welding torch. The Cathar stared at her, their large, liquid eyes full of incomprehension. "Your bodies are shutting down. We need to generate heat. Now. Jinx, find me anything in this wreck that burns. Insulation, hydraulic fluid, nutrient paste, I don't care. Eris, figure out the most sheltered part of the wreckage and get these frozen dear people huddled up. Xylo, you're with me. I need you to translate. Tell your people if they fall asleep, they're not waking up." The concept of burning, of uncontrolled combustion, was anathema to the Cathar. It was chaotic, destructive, a primitive folly their ancestors had abandoned eons ago in favor of clean, controllable fusion. "Burn the ship," Xylo stammered, his words slurring. "Parts of it, yeah," Eva said, her breath already misting in the air. "To stop all of us from becoming permanent, very surprised-looking ice sculptures." "Now move," there was a quality in her voice, a granite certainty that pierced through Xylo's cold-induced apathy. He stumbled after her, relaying her commands in his own faltering language. The Cathar responded slowly, their survival instinct a tiny, flickering ember against the overwhelming urge to simply lie down and let the end come. Jinx, with a manic grin, returned with a collection of polymer wall panels and a canister of something flammable. "This stuff is basically spaceship kerosene," he announced proudly. Eva found a relatively intact section of the cargo bay, shielded from the worst of the wind. She arranged the panels in a careful pile. The Cathar watched, their silver fur puffed up, their bodies trembling from both cold and fear. "She is summoning the great destroyer," one of them whispered. "It is the ritual of the Death Worlders," another moaned. "They will consume us all in the angry light." Eva ignored them. She took out a standard-issue emergency plasma lighter. It sputtered in the thin, frigid air. The first few attempts failed. The Cathar huddled further back, a collective sigh of relief rippling through them. The demon's ritual was failing. Jinx grunted. "Gimme that. The fuel mixture is wrong for this atmospheric pressure." He fiddled with the lighter's nozzle for a moment, then looked at Eris. "Hey Doc, hold my beer." Eris, who had no beer, just blinked. "I don't have one." "It's an expression, Eris," Eva said without looking up from her work. "It means he's about to do something either very clever or very stupid." Jinx made a final adjustment and clicked the lighter. A brilliant, defiant jet of orange flame erupted, startlingly loud in the frozen silence. He touched it to the edge of the polymer panel. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, a small, greedy tongue of flame licked upwards. It grew, feeding on the material, and a wave of glorious, life-giving heat washed over them. The Cathar flinched back as one, shielding their eyes. They had never seen a naked flame before. They had never felt its raw, untamed warmth. It was terrifying, it was beautiful. "Oh no," Eva said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she held her hands out to the blaze. The hot, life-giving light, how absolutely terrible. The sheer horror of not freezing to death. Xylo stared at the fire, mesmerized. The heat was a physical thing, pushing back the crushing cold, thawing his frozen limbs, clarifying his thoughts. He looked at the humans. They were gathered around the fire as if it were an old friend. Jinx was poking it with a metal strut. Eris was analyzing its spectral emissions on his datapad. Eva was scanning the perimeter, her expression one of grim satisfaction. They were not afraid of it. They had tamed it. They had taken the universe's most primal force of destruction and bent it to their will. They had looked at certain death on a frozen hellscape and told it to hold their beer. For the first time since the crash, Xylo felt a flicker of something other than terror. It was a strange, unfamiliar emotion, and it took him a moment to identify it. It was hope, a terrifying, human-shaped hope. The survivors of the Starlight's tier were rescued 3 days later. The rescue crew found a bizarre scene. A small, functioning camp built around a blazing fire in the heart of the wreckage, with nearly 24 Cathar huddled together, alive and well, being supervised by 3 calm, soot-stained humans. The official report submitted by Xylo was a masterpiece of understated panic. It noted the unorthodox thermal generation techniques and the paradoxical psychological stability of the human contingent under lethal environmental stress. Fleet Captain Valerius read the report, and the dozen similar reports from other crashed ships where the few humans aboard had performed similar miracles of improbable survival. The rumors, it seemed, had not been an exaggeration. They had been a dramatic understatement. The humans were reclassified from biological emergency systems to priority alpha crisis assets. Their quarters were upgraded. They even got their coffee machine. The convoy, battered but intact, limped on its way. A new sense of security, fragile though it was, settled over the Cathar. They had their secret weapon now. They had their pet Death Worlders. This comforting illusion lasted for 6 standard months, right up until the point the convoy's lead navigator, addled by the lingering trauma of the gravimetric shear, plotted a course that clipped the edge of an uncharted system containing a rogue brown dwarf with a wildly unpredictable magnetic field. The second crash was less violent but more comprehensive. Dozens of ships, including the fleet captain's flagship, the Eternal Serenity, were pulled from hyperspace and sent spiraling down onto the system's single, rust-colored planet. Xylo awoke to a jarringly different environment. The air was thick, hot, and humid, smelling of pollen and decay. Through the shattered viewport he saw a jungle, but it wasn't a jungle of lush greens and vibrant life. It was a landscape of fleshy, pulsating reds, sickly yellows, and sinister purples. The trees were more like colossal fungi, and the ground was a carpet of writhing, tentacled moss. "Atmosphere is breathable," Thorne announced cheerfully, peering at his datapad. High oxygen, lots of interesting organic compounds, and oh my, the flora seems to be motile. As if on cue, a vine thick as Xylo's arm snaked down from the canopy, its end unfurling into a kind of fanged maw. It snapped at a piece of fallen debris, constricting around it with a wet, crunching sound. The Cathar on board the Eternal Serenity began to scream. This was, in many ways, worse than the ice planet. The cold was a passive, impersonal death. This was a world that actively wanted to eat them. Threat analysis alarms blared in Xylo's mind. Everything here was a predator, even the grass. Eva Rostova took a deep breath of the soupy air and stretched. Right. Feels like a Tuesday back in the Amazon wars. Jinx, get a perimeter sensor grid running. Aris, try not to get eaten while you're satisfying your scientific curiosity. Xylo, get your people organized. We're going camping. Camping? Xylo squeaked, watching a flower the size of his torso pivot on its stalk to follow a passing insect-like creature. This is not camping. This is a verdant hell that consumes all life. Potato, Eva waved a dismissive hand. First things first, water, shelter, and a defensible position. Looks like the ship's fuselage is our best bet for shelter. Let's clear the immediate area. What followed was, for the Cathar, a spectacle of pure, undiluted madness. The humans treated the planet-sized death trap like an inconveniently aggressive national park. Jinx jury-rigged a sonic emitter from the ship's comms array that made the smaller, vine-like plants recoil. Aris, armed with a sample kit and a disturbingly large knife, began cautiously cataloging the local horrors. Look at this one, he called out, pointing to a bulbous purple plant that periodically puffed out a cloud of shimmering spores. A puffball creeper. The spores are a paralytic neurotoxin. Fascinating. Don't breathe it in, by the way. The Cathar, including Fleet Captain Valerius himself, huddled inside the broken shell of the flagship, watching the humans work. Their fear was now mixed with a profound, almost religious awe. A young Cathar scout, driven by a flicker of programmed duty, ventured 20 paces from the ship. A root, indistinguishable from the dozens of others on the ground, shot up and wrapped around his leg. He let out a terrified bleat. Before the Cathar could even process the event into a full-blown panic attack, Eva was moving. She didn't run. She moved with a swift, economical grace that was terrifying in its own right. She reached the struggling scout, drew a combat knife, and with 2 precise cuts severed the root. It writhed on the ground before dissolving into a foul-smelling sludge. She helped the shaking scout to his feet. Rule number 1 of camping in a new place. Watch your step, she said, not unkindly. Then she looked at the severed root. Jinx, you think we can cook that? Probably tough, Jinx called back, not looking up from his work. But I can try anything once. Valerius watched from the viewport, his 4 ears flattened against his skull. Xylo, he said, his voice barely a whisper. They are considering eating the planet that is trying to eat us. It appears to be their default response to adversity, Captain, Xylo replied, his own voice numb with a kind of second-hand insanity. He was starting to understand. For humans, survival wasn't about avoiding threats. It was about assessing a threat, dismantling it, and then checking to see if it was edible. It was a fundamentally different and horrifyingly effective philosophy. That night, the humans built another fire. The Cathar, remembering the life-saving warmth of the ice world, did not protest. They gathered near it, though they still gave the flames a wide, respectful berth. The fire seemed to keep the more aggressive nocturnal plants at bay. Aris was excitedly explaining his findings. The entire ecosystem is networked. It's a single superorganism, communicating through chemical signals and subterranean root systems. The ground-level plants act as sensory organs, and the larger canopy dwellers are the primary digestive systems. It's brilliant. So the whole planet is trying to kill us in a coordinated fashion, Eva asked, sharpening her knife on a piece of stone. Precisely, Aris beamed. Isn't it wonderful? The Cathar exchanged looks of pure terror. Their crisis assets were not merely survivors. They were connoisseurs of catastrophe. They found joy in the intricate mechanisms of their own potential demise. The next few days fell into a routine. The humans secured the crash site, scavenged supplies, and began work on repairing the ship's primary beacon. The Cathar, under Xylo's reluctant direction, were assigned simple, non-lethal tasks: sorting supplies, weaving salvaged cable into rope, and maintaining a lookout from the safety of the wreckage. They performed their duties with the grim diligence of a people who knew they were living on borrowed time, entirely dependent on the whims of their profoundly strange guardians. The turning point in Xylo's understanding came on the fourth day. He found Eva sitting on a log by the fire, cleaning a projectile weapon. He gathered his courage and approached her. "Sergeant Rostova," he began, his voice a soft chime. "May I ask a question?" "Shoot," she said, not looking up. "How are you not paralyzed by fear? How are any of you?" He gestured to Jinx, who was whistling as he rewired a power conduit near a plant that rhythmically snapped a set of thorny jaws. "We are surrounded by death. Every shadow, every rustle of a leaf is a promise of oblivion, yet you treat it as an inconvenience." Eva finally stopped her work and looked at him. Her eyes, which he had first found cold and intimidating, now seemed to hold a deep, ancient weariness. "Xylo, where you come from is a garden. Where we come from is a battlefield. For millions of years, our planet tried to freeze us, bake us, starve us, poison us, and drown us. Our own biology turned on us with plagues and cancers. The things living next to us evolved teeth and claws and venom. Then, when we finally got the hang of surviving all that, we started trying to kill each other over shiny rocks and imaginary friends." She paused, gesturing to the menacing jungle around them. This is just another Tuesday. The monsters are a little uglier, but the rules are the same. You don't panic, you don't give up. You figure out how to be the bigger, meaner monster, or at the very least the one that's too much trouble to eat." Xylo stood in silence, processing this. The humans weren't insane. They were forged. They had been hammered into their current shape on the anvil of a world that hated them, and they had not only endured, they had hit back. They had taken that planetary hatred and turned it into a toolkit. Suddenly, a new alarm blared from Jinx's makeshift perimeter sensors. Guys," he called out. "Big-time energy reading. Something's happening. Aris, what's your take?" Aris was staring at his datapad, his eyes wide. "It's a synchronized bloom event. The entire planetary network is about to enter its primary reproductive and feeding cycle. Everything is about to get hyper-aggressive." As he spoke, the jungle floor began to move. Vines lashed out like whips, flowers spewed clouds of toxic spores, and the ground itself trembled as massive root systems shifted. The Cathar let out a collective wail of despair. "Well," Eva said, standing up and cocking her weapon with a solid, definitive clack, "looks like the camping trip just got interesting." She glanced at the huddle of terrified aliens. "Stay behind us, and try not to scream so loud it's distracting." The Cathar did as they were told. They pressed themselves against the hull of the ship and watched as the three humans formed a defensive triangle around the beacon and the fire. The universe threw its vegetative fury at them, and the humans, those impossible children of a world of pain, stood their ground and fought back. By the time the rest of the convoy located their distress beacon, the human-led survivors of the Eternal Serenity were no longer just refugees. They were legends. The stories spread through the fleet like wildfire. The tale of the ice world was frightening enough, but the story of the carnivorous planet was the stuff of myth. They said the humans had laughed in the face of the planet-sized monster. They said they had roasted its limbs over an open flame and debated the seasoning. They said that, when faced with overwhelming odds, their only response was to get more creative in their defiance. The term Priority Alpha Crisis Asset was quietly retired. A new, unofficial designation began to circulate among the whispering Cathar crews, the Death-Tolerant Demons. Fleet Captain Valerius made it official. Sergeant Eva Rostova was given a permanent advisory position on the bridge of the newly designated flagship, the Indomitable Will. She was granted command authority in any designated crisis situation. Her first act was to demand a tactical-grade coffee machine be installed next to the captain's chair. It was done without question. Life in the convoy changed. The Cathar still lived in a state of chronic anxiety, but it was now tinged with a strange, vicarious confidence. They had their demons on a leash. As long as the humans were kept fed, caffeinated, and reasonably entertained, surely nothing could truly harm the fleet. Xylo, now permanently assigned as the official interspecies liaison officer, a title that meant his primary job was to translate human sarcasm and explain why Jinx was trying to ferment engine coolant, found a new, surreal rhythm to his life. He was the primary handler for the convoy's pet gods of chaos. This new status quo was tested nearly a year later in the cold, silent void between galaxies. There was no crash this time, no malevolent planet. The disaster was quiet, insidious, and came from within. It started with a cough. A Cathar technician in engineering let out a dry, rasping hack. Then another. Within hours, a dozen crew members were afflicted. Their silver fur began to dull, and their movements grew sluggish. It was a microbe, a stowaway from the carnivorous plant world that had lain dormant in their ventilation systems. For the humans, with their ridiculously over-engineered immune systems, it was a mild allergen, causing nothing more than an occasional sneeze. For the Cathar, whose sterile society had eradicated disease millennia ago, it was a plague. Worse, the microbe had an affinity for the organic polymers used in the ship's life support filters. It was consuming them, breaking down the entire environmental system, and releasing toxic spores as a byproduct. The air was slowly, inexorably turning to poison. This time the Cathar response was different. There was no screaming. There was no flailing panic. There was only a great, silent, collective turning of heads. On the bridge of the indomitable will, every single Cathar officer, from the helmsman to fleet captain Valerius himself, turned their large, liquid eyes on Sergeant Rostova, who was calmly sipping a mug of dark, steaming coffee. The silence was absolute. It was a silence of complete and utter abdication. It was the silence of 1,000 terrified souls looking to their patron saints of catastrophe for salvation. Eva took a slow sip, then lowered her mug with a soft click. "Right," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "So the air is trying to kill us now. A classic. Aris, get your lab coat. Jinx, grab your big wrench. Xylo, tell the captain and his crew to find a nice, quiet corner to huddle in and try not to hyperventilate. It wastes the good air." Valerius nodded meekly. "We will offer meditative support." "You do that," Eva said, already moving. "We'll handle the whole not dying part." What followed was not a battle against an external foe, but a frantic, high-stakes race against their own ship's decay. Aris isolated the microbe in a mobile lab, working feverishly to synthesize a retrovirus that would neutralize it. His cheerful humming as he spliced alien genes was a deeply unnerving soundtrack to the unfolding apocalypse. Jinx, covered in grease and muttering a litany of curses that the translator thankfully couldn't parse, became a dervish of engineering. The primary filters were failing. He had to bypass them entirely, rerouting the entire atmospheric flow through a secondary system that was never designed for this kind of load. The engine's plasma coolant scrubbers. "It's a long shot," he yelled over the comm, his voice tinny. "If I overload the matrix, we either vent the rest of our air into space or the engine core goes critical. 50-50, I'd say." Eva stood on the bridge, coordinating the effort. She had turned the main view screen into a schematic of the ship's life support, her commands sharp and precise. "Xylo, I need pressure readings from Sector 7. Now, Xylo, who was now more of an extension of Eva's will than a Cathar officer, relayed the information instantly. He had stopped being afraid. He had moved past fear into a state of pure, adrenaline-fueled fascination. He was watching his demons dance. The climax came in the deepest part of the engineering bay. A crucial junction had to be manually severed and rerouted, and the automated systems were failing. Jinx had to go in himself, wearing a hastily modified EVA suit. The air in that section was already thick with toxic spores. "I'm going with you," Eva stated, pulling on a helmet. "Not a two-person job," Jinx grunted. "I'm not coming to help," she retorted, her voice muffled through the helmet's speaker. "I'm coming to shoot you if you pass out before you finish the job." A new voice, a soft chime, came over the comm. "I will accompany you as well." It was Xylo. He stood at the airlock wearing one of the Cathar's spindly, awkward emergency suits. Eva turned. "Why, you'll just be in the way." "It is my duty as liaison," Xylo said, his voice trembling but firm. "To witness, to record the miracle." Eva stared at him for a long moment, then gave a short, sharp nod. Fine, try not to trip over anything. The three of them entered the dying section of the ship. Red lights flashed, and a thick, yellow haze filled the air. Jinx went to work, his tools moving with desperate speed. Eva stood guard, her rifle at the ready for no discernible reason other than it seemed to be her natural state. Xylo simply watched, his wide eyes taking in every detail. He watched as the human engineer wrestled with the guts of a starship, held together by sheer stubbornness. He watched as the human sergeant stood as an immovable bulwark against the entropy of the universe. With a final, agonizing groan of metal, Jinx wrenched the last conduit into place. "It's done," he gasped, slumping against the bulkhead. "The scrubbers are engaged. Air should start clearing now." On the bridge, the air quality alarms flickered from red to amber, then, after a painfully long minute, to a blessed, stable green. A soft, collective sigh, the sound of 1,000 beings remembering how to breathe, filled the ship. Back in engineering, Xylo looked at the two humans. They were leaning against a wall, breathing heavily, their work done. They had faced the void, wrestled with a plague, re-engineered a starship on the fly, and won. He finally understood. They weren't demons, they weren't gods, they were just humans. Their terrifying, awe-inspiring, universe-breaking superpower was simply an absolute, bone-deep refusal to die. Later, on the now-clean bridge, Fleet Captain Valerius approached the human contingent. He executed the deepest, most reverent bow Xylo had ever seen him perform. "We are in your debt once again," Valerius chimed, his voice filled with a humility that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "The Cathar people owe you our existence. Ask for anything, a ship of your own, a world, command of this fleet, it is yours." Eva, Aris, and Jinx exchanged a look. Eva stepped forward. "We appreciate the offer, Captain," she said. "But we're good, just keep the coffee coming, and maybe if it's not too much trouble we'd like to install a recreation room." "A room for recreation?" Valerius asked, puzzled. "Of course. What would it contain?" "Oh, you know," Jinx said with a grin. "A gravity cage, some plasma throwers, maybe a live-fire obstacle course. Just a place to relax and keep our skills sharp." Valerius and the entire Cathar bridge crew paled. They wanted to build a small piece of their Death World home inside the ship, for fun. "It shall be done," Valerius whispered. The great Cathar migration continued. They never found a new homeworld that was as safe and perfect as the one they had left. Instead, they found something better. They found patrons. As they drifted through the vast, uncaring cosmos, the 1,000 ships of the convoy followed their flagship, the indomitable Will, like children following a parent. And on its bridge, their 3 resident humans stood watch, sipping their toxic beverages, forever ready for the next glorious, universe-ending disaster. Their presence a constant, terrifying, and deeply comforting promise that no matter what horrors the future held, the Cathar would not have to face them alone. They would have their demons to light the way.